Changing the body changes society. Changing society changes the soul. Changing the soul changes society. Changing society changes it all.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a movie about a spiteful harridan who henpecks a bunch of cool, fun-loving dudes until they go insane or kill themselves. Less a film about medical malpractice inflicted upon the mentally ill, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is more a microcosm of the modern world. It's society, man, it's society. Are you antisocial? Are you maladjusted? Or do you just hate being held down and electrocuted? Are you really a danger to yourself or others, or just to the people holding the keys to your cage? Ostensibly, Ken Kesey, author of the original novel, was one of the biggest hippie freaks of his generation. He lived in a commune with members of the Grateful Dead and traveled across the country in a bus, doing drugs and engaging in other 1960s-era quirk-chungus behaviors. And to be sure, the general through line of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is one of 1960s-era counterculture, of rebellion against the status quo. But then where this story differs from so many others, where it differs from so much cultural myth-making, past and present, is in its depiction of authority, what authority looks like and how it operates. Here, authority isn't represented by jackboots, cigar-chomping military generals, or straight-laced Wall Street bankers. Here, the avatar of authority is a woman who speaks softly and holds therapy sessions. It's a woman who's friends with your mother, who wears a uniform typically associated with nurturing and healing, but whose true intentions are given away by her hair, done up like devil horns. Here's a woman who presents herself as enlightened and humane, but when poked and prodded, seems to nurture a deep and abiding resentment. For men, possibly, but certainly for any challenge to her authority. An authority underwritten by the medical, surgical, and chemical torments of an institution which, at the time, were also presented as the most enlightened, most humane way of dealing with troubled or troubling individuals. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in its microcosm of modern dehumanization, appears to allude to the increasing encroachment of the femme-centric therapy-speak managerial state.
Excuse me, miss. Do you think it might be possible to turn that music down so maybe a couple of the boys could talk?
Your hand is staining my window.
This utopian social project, this brave new world, is assuredly humane and enlightened in its reasoning.
That music is for everyone, Mr. McMurphy. What you probably don't realize is that we have a lot of old men on this ward who couldn't hear the music if we turned it lower.
It's united in its commitment to pluralism, in that it keeps any one power from rivaling its own. It values and is constructed around a prescribed set of outcomes as opposed to individual pursuit towards a collective ideal, which in doing creates a citizenry of dependents whose sociability is largely contingent on the state meeting all their material needs.
I want my cigarettes! I want mine!
In this brave new world is an attempt at pure rationality, the idea that the wayward, the stunted, or the obscene might be categorized, pathologized, medicated, and if all else fails, have their affliction cut out of them, while never stopping to wonder if it isn't these very methods of control which are driving people up the wall in the first place. At the same time, this utopian social project is decidedly whimsical in where and how it applies its rationale.
Experts say that the tear gas and pepper spray make you more susceptible to respiratory disease.
Sure, Nurse Ratched has all these rules and regulations that she claims inform her decisions, but at the end of the day, maybe she just doesn't like your face. And maybe the punishment for not liking your face is a stern talking to, and maybe it's a turn in the electro-shock room. Who's to say? The film makes a pointed commentary on the utopian social project's whimsical conception of democracy, when McMurphy petitions Nurse Ratched to let he and his fellow patients watch the World Series.
How would it be if we had a vote and let majority rule?
Nurse Ratched appeals to democracy insofar as it might overlap with her own particular social project. Confronted by an engaged and politically savvy electorate, she enlists an anonymized horde of mush-brained vegetables to help tip the scales.
All right. That's it.
I only count 9 votes, Mr. McMurphy. There are 18 patients on this ward, Mr. McMurphy, and you have to have a majority to change ward policy.
Are you trying to tell me that you're going to count these? These poor son of a bitches, they don't even know what we're talking about.
Well, I have to disagree with you, Mr. McMurphy. These men are members of the ward, just as you are.
Then, when democracy eventually fails to go her way,
Nurse Ratched, look! Look! The chief put his hand up!
she defaults to the supreme, ultimately whimsical authority of the institution.
Mr. McMurphy, the meeting was adjourned and the vote was closed. No, Mr. McMurphy. When the meeting was adjourned, the vote was 9-9.
Which again is underwritten by force. The only consistency is power and who it's wielded against. The black orderlies forefronted in the film seem to suggest a certain racial retribution, a routinely policed, routinely incarcerated demographic given license to inflict the same upon the less melanated population of the institution. The black orderlies seem to suggest the utopian project's tendency to attach itself to and weaponize racial grievance toward its own political ends. Nurse Ratched as well seems to use her authority as a venue to weaponize her resentment. Does the institution seek these personalities out, or do they naturally gravitate towards such positions? In the utopian social project, as in the mental hospital in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, is an attempt at pathologizing the inevitable pitfalls of modernity. The loss of community, dignity, and identity, or rather the unseemly reaction to such losses, is categorized as a sickness, or a phobia. The name Ratched seems to be a portmanteau of ratchet and wretched, modern invention associated with evil or defilement. The film is bookended by picturesque Oregon landscapes into which only Chief Bromden, the Native American avatar of the pre-industrialized man, is able to escape. It's no coincidence that the battle for control in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest tends to manifest as a gendered conflict between Nurse Ratched and her patients.
You're gonna pull that henhouse shit now when the vote the chief just voted it was 10-9.
As modernity increasingly transfers meaning and power from the material, what you can do with your hands, to the conceptual, what you can do with administrative authority, women, generally speaking, tend to acclimate better. As power changes, so do priorities. There you are, you're a guy, and maybe you're sick, maybe you're not, but then either way, maybe the best way to get better again is to go fishing, is to hang out with the boys and blow off some steam. You know, guy stuff. But instead you got these dames, and all they want to do is talk about your ex-wife, talk about your mother. They decide when you get up, when you go to bed. They won't let you watch the ball game. They get mad when you have too much fun at basketball. They get mad when you have sex. They might as well be pathologizing masculinity itself. To pathologize something is to imply there might be a treatment or even a cure for such behavior. Red meat for the aspiring rationalist. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the hospital's approach to treating the mentally ill is to reduce human complexity down to biological function, whereby any failure of socialization may be medicated, electrocuted, or ultimately cut away from the afflicted. In pathologizing masculinity, it's a wonder Nurse Ratched doesn't try to cure men of their manhood by simply cutting off their
penis to vagina.
Oh. Before the institution might geld or lobotomize you, however, its rationality, its highest ideal, demands it appeal to the rationality of the individual. You, me, the knife-wielding maniac on the street, we are all, surely, operating by rational processes. And so, therein comes Nurse Ratched's group therapy sessions. These sessions offer the pretense of compassion, of camaraderie, while being primarily a venue for shame, humiliation, and coercion. In Nurse Ratched's Brave New World, control is maintained not just by what's done to you, but what you observe being done to others. Granted, this is how order is maintained in most societies, is by example, but it's only the utopian social project, as embodied by the hospital in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which operates under the pretense that these shows of force are about the rehabilitation of the individual, rather than the cohesion of the institution. Sure, you could just lobotomize everyone, but then who's going to sweep the floors or lock up at night? Gender dynamics come up again when thinking about the title of the story. What is a cuckoo's nest? Well, they don't make one.
For the cuckoo's trickery to be successful, there is a lot she has to do. She must first remove one or more warbler egg to make room for her egg.
Nurse Ratched, implied to be a childless spinster, must instead lay her eggs in the mind through methods of control. From the cuckoo bird is also where we get the word cuckold, which might just as well be synonymous with emasculation. Ultimately, Nurse Ratched does answer to men in the form of her bosses, but then this only serves to underscore the underlying pretense of the modern progressive social project, where at the end of the day, even the softest, most egalitarian power structures are underwritten by the hard material power of violence. violence, over which men, for better or worse, largely hold a monopoly. One thing to note, however, is how many of the men in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest have had themselves voluntarily committed.
You're voluntary? Mm-hmm. Billy, for Christ's sakes, you must be committed, right? No.
Why would someone voluntarily submit themselves to such treatment? Well, why do any of us? This is the social contract we're given, and for lack of anything else, we abide by it as best we can. In the voluntary nature of the hospital, the film paints a portrait of men in retreat. People resigned to being mute spectators to their own disenfranchisement, a symbolism reinforced in the idea of the Native American as civilizational spectator, the institution as the reservation, as the winnowing away of the spirit, and so on and so forth. Even if Chief Bromden did voluntarily check himself in, there's no freedom to be had by simply walking out the door. To walk out the door would be to accept the premise of the cuckoo's nest, to come and go on its terms. To escape, however, is to acknowledge and reject the whole thing. Okay, I think that's all I have to say about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Let me know what you think. Subscribe if so inclined. I write books if you like books. Books about society. Society, man. Okay, goodbye.